What questions do you all dread the most?
Are you going to have another baby? Yeah. Have you moved on yet? Are you better? I'm so glad I have a relationship with Jesus, because if not, I would be in prison. I mean.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you moved on yet? People ask that.
Yeah.
Have you moved on?
But I think people are well-intentioned when they say, are you thinking about having another baby? I think they're well-intentioned with that.
But it's as if having another baby would somehow replace the baby that I had.
I see that.
And that's not how any of this works. You don't replace one child with another. You can't replace your dad. You can't replace your son. You can't replace your church family, your mom. So it's not that simple.
What questions do you dread, Richard?
None.
None. None.
None.
Well, we know what not to ask. What should we be asking?
Oh, that's such a good question.
What should we be asking?
How are you today?
How are you today? Stephanie?
How are you doing? Do you need anything? How can we help? I've gotten those so many times. And even if I say, oh, I'm okay, I don't need anything, just knowing that they're there is such a huge help.
How can I best support you? That's an every phase of grief question. How can I best support you?
Yes.
I am here, and then continue to ask the question.
Richard? You said there are no questions that you say are off limits for you.
I want it done. I mean, I can remember it was watching Pulse.
Watching
the coverage,
Pulse in
the coverage
Orlando.
after Pulse.
Yes.
Yeah. And some of the first responders were talking about going in there to the nightclub, and they were hearing cell phones ringing beside dead bodies.
Yes, I remember that.
And I thought, that was us. You know, that night we were calling Chris. We didn't know where he was. We didn't know if he was okay or not. And we were calling, and that was us. You remember those kinds of things. And the same thing happened for all of us. It was 4 hours before we learned that Chris was dead. And you know, we were led to believe he was in the hospital, that he was shot in the leg, that he was going to be all right. And then we come to find out that he died at the scene and never made it to the hospital. He was 20 years old. You know.
You're shaking your head, Nelba? It was hours
Same.
too? Yeah.
Hours and hours and hours, and it's possible the outside knew before we did.
Yeah.
I don't know that anyone knew how to tell us, that there were 20 children who weren't coming back. So, and I think what people fail to understand is that communities don't survive this without great impact. So these Newtown, El Paso, Charleston, Isla Vista, we are all forever wounded. That means my neighbors, that means first responders, that means the teachers, that means anybody who Chris's life touched. It's more than just
the immediate family.
The immediate family, the four of us, it's our entire community's grief. Newtown will never be the same. And how could it be?
Well, it shatters any sense of safety in a community. You know, it changes the way you look at the world. It does.
The church won't ever be the same. I believe they need to make the church a museum and then build a new church, because now it's the place where people come in Charleston now. The first place they want to go
is to see the church,
and take selfies, or they want to go inside the church. And so the congregation is very transient. Some members have left. And I just think the church needs to make it a museum and get out of that and build a new church, because the old Emmanuel won't ever be the same.
Where are you all on the issue of forgiveness for the shooter?
My sister was the first one to say, I forgive you. I was in Dallas, Texas, and heard her voice on the TV, and I started screaming and hollering, like, 48 hours and you're talking about forgiveness? But you never seem to hear that in any other incident that have happened.
It was extraordinary that she came out so quickly.
It took me almost a year, even being a reverend.
So you have forgiven?
I have now.
You have?
But I had to.
Why?
in order to get all of that anger and rage and that feeling of not being able to move physically, it's like it drags you, it holds you. And I had to get to a point in understanding what I really believed in my faith and to be able to be free.
But the shooter in your case has publicly said, I have no remorse, I have no regrets. How do you forgive that?
Because it's not about you. There will never be repentance. It was for me. It was for me to be able to get all of that released. Because if you continue to carry that, you never are able to actually go through all the stages of grief, however that falls.
I don't think about it.
You don't?
I don't. I want to understand as best as possible, think about it. I don't think about forgiving him. Toronto, there were some killings in Toronto. The guy killed some folks with a van, and he said that my son's killer was his inspiration for that. I was contacted by the media afterwards saying, what is your reaction to this latest incel killing? And Dayton now is supposed to be an incel killing. The Isla Vista killer has been identified by the Guardian newspaper as the patron saint of incels.
Incel
so
killer
I want to
means,
understand
what
that.
does incel killer mean?
Involuntarily celibate.
Celibate,
It's kind of a toxic form of misogyny that's out there on the dark web and on the internet and various places.
He did not like how he was treated by women.
Yeah, he had a sense of
very angry
entitlement.
at women, yes. I know you don't think about it, but do you think you're capable of forgiving him?
No.
No. Stephanie, where are you on forgiveness?
I mean, I'm still kind of numb
I know.
over it, and I feel like I should be angry. I should be like, why? And it is, those questions do one, like, why him? He was shielding an older woman and a child. Why him? And, forgiveness, I have no idea at this point.
Yeah.
Maybe ask me a few years down the line
Yeah.
when it starts to sink in that this really happened.
What is your overwhelming feeling other than sadness and grief? Are you angry? Are you...
It's just so, I like how she explained it. It's like a fog right now.
Yeah.
It's
Overwhelming.
Yeah.
There's so much going on, and like days are almost robotic almost, and you're just numb, and you're just trying to figure out what's my next step.
Yeah,
what do I do now? And they came and they told us they had him, and he was in prison. When they told my daughter that he was away, he wasn't gonna ever hurt her again, she got happy because she was safe again.
Yeah.
And as far as I don't know, because he's not only taken my father, he's taken a piece of my child as well, and of my mom. He affected so much at our home. It's never going to be that normal again.
Yeah. Nelba, where are you on forgiveness?
I respect every victim's way and right, but I just don't understand why it's a narrative we quickly go to after shootings. Why we put this, do you forget, I'm glad you're asking the question because now other people can learn. I think it's an unfair pressure to put on victims to have this, if you forgive. I saw it in Newtown. All of a sudden the forgiveness families were in one bucket, and those were the wise families, and then the ones who were like, no, why should I have to forgive them, were seen as another. So if you're asking me personally, I want you to stop giving your son access to weapons. And if you give your sons unrestricted access to weapons, then no, I do not forgive you, especially when they hurt other people.
That issue really came to the fore in Aurora over the death penalty.
Yeah. Is a forgiveness question, I hadn't thought of it that way until you said it. Is it an unfair question to ask?
It is.
I'm glad you're asking it because other people can, but it's almost like you've had this horrific, and they were asking that of Sandy Hook families 24 hours later, 48 hours later. And I'm like, wait, when did this become my responsibility to absolve the person and to absolve it? Because I feel like it's another way to let folks off the hook. Oh, well, they're fine because they forgave. No, it doesn't work like that.
I mean, I think also we have to think about the people who are the shooters too. In all of these cases, they were young men, young white men in their 20s.
We don't like to talk about the intersection of race in a lot of these mass shooting situations, but I think it's an important conversation to have. What is happening with race and gender in these higher profile events, and what are we going to do about it? How are we going to respond?
Well, and the level of hate
Yes.
that's being generated in the country and acted out upon.
It's
by
an
these
uncomfortable
young men.
conversation.
It is.
Race
Nobody wants to say the wrong thing.
Talking about race and white supremacy makes you uncomfortable. There are groups now that follow Dylan Roof, so they want to follow that, and I just didn't understand it. That was the kind of hate that was going on until after Charleston, and then I realized there are millions of people who feel that people of color, black people, aren't worthy to live and be happy, and you want to kill them. And it's just beyond understanding that black people and people of color are still having to deal with being hurt and killed because of the color of their skins, and America has to step up. They really do.
Yeah, but Sandy Hook wasn't a race issue.
It wasn't, but it permeates everything. Because I'll tell you an interesting conversation my husband said to me shortly after the shooting. We went to the grocery store, and there's not a lot of people who look like us in Newtown. And he looked at me, and he doesn't cry very often. I'm going to cry telling this story, but he was sitting in the driver's seat before we got out at the Stop and Shop, and he goes, you know, I've spent my whole life as a black man in America trying to convey that I'm a safe person, especially in white environments. I look people in the eye. I make sure not to take up too much space because I'm a 6 foot, 6 inch, 300-pound black man. Yet a white person, boy, killed my daughter, and I'm not allowed to look at him or look at others in that way, right? I'm supposed to just see that as an exception. I'm supposed to give a grace that I have never been given as a black man in America. However, I will, but I wish people would give that to us. And I sat in the passenger seat and I just cried with him because it's true. It's true. And we have to talk about it. We have to have these uncomfortable conversations.
Yes.
I was reading Olivia Newton-John's book, who's going through cancer, and she said, time is a wonderful healer, but grief is like the ocean. It comes in waves. There are times when you are lost at sea. I thought that was a beautiful way to say it. Does that resonate with you?
Very much.
Because they always say time heals all wounds.
It's not like you recover or you don't. I mean,
It just is.
It's both. You know, you can in some ways feel stronger, and in some ways, you know that you're never going to be the same. I think you have to think about that you can still wonder at life, and you can still be grateful for things in your life.
And we do have moments of joy that I'm deeply grateful for, but that whole Kubler-Ross thinking of stages of grief that start with shock and end in acceptance, when it comes to gun violence, throw that right out the window. We should never end in acceptance because this should never be accepted.
These four are linked through their tragedy. As Gayle said, they are in a club no one wants to be part of. I spoke with Gayle about what it's like to facilitate this emotional conversation and her biggest takeaways from the discussion.
Just think what she said, it's a hell's lottery, and it's a game we're all playing. It's a game we're all playing that at any time, any day, it could happen to any of us. It's a club, I said to them, it's a club nobody wants to join, and yet there they are.
And, you know, they talked about in the first part how there's almost now groupings of these shootings. They become so common that we've got buckets to put them in.
Yes.
You know, and you know, when you're hearing a Sandy Hook family, that was the shooting 6 years ago that everybody talked about was going to be the one that finally changed things. And here we are 6 years later, you're talking to somebody who lost a loved one in El Paso earlier this month.
3 weeks ago, yeah. I asked Nelba about that, the mother of little Anna Grace, because everybody thought this will be the shooting that will change things. You have these 20 little children from, you know, an affluent suburb in Connecticut, and 6 educators, and the thought, because we all at some point have taken our kids to school, you thought finally now that will change. And Nelba said, so imagine how painful it is for her, 2012 to 2019, to see that nothing really has changed. But they are thinking, many of them are thinking that now for the first time, maybe because it was back-to-back, El Paso and Dayton, that lawmakers and politicians are starting to talk about it in a way that they haven't talked about before. I can't say they're optimistic, but there's a part of them that thinks maybe, just maybe, things will be different. I don't know.
Do they feel a rallying cry, a push now to try to take things across the finish line? If politicians are talking differently, is now the time that they're trying to do something?
They do feel that, but you know what? They've all been doing that since they were affected by this. You know, you have people in Columbine that have still been working on this. So everybody is trying to do something, somebody who belongs to this horrible club. But it really is up to the people of the United States, the way that we vote, the way we talk to our lawmakers. And why I wanted to do this interview, you know, I started just talking to Nelba, and she said, you know, I think it would be more interesting if you talk to other people who've been through shootings. And she was right about that, so you could see the different perspectives. I don't want us to become desensitized to it. That's why why I wanted to do this story so badly. Because Steve Hartman, as you know, a member of the CBS family, always does what I think are very compelling, you know, heart-tugging, heart pieces.
Heartwarming pieces.
Heartwarming,
usually.
that's the word I'm looking for. Thank you, Chris Bankley. Very heartwarming pieces. And I saw him do a story after one of the shootings. And the way he described that story, you could have plugged in any shooting. I can't believe it's happened here. We had no idea. The family says this. There's always a hero. There's always somebody who was in the right place at the right time, or somebody's in the wrong place at the wrong time. And Steve said something that I've never forgotten. He said, we mourn, we pray, we repeat. And what Nelba said about the Hell's Lottery, it is that. All of those people sitting in that room said, it is going to happen again. It's going to happen again. And what is the number count that we have to get before people finally think, now we have to make changes? They also said, and I thought this was interesting too, the reason why they're speaking out is they're hoping that somebody will hear their stories, and maybe when you put a face to it, that you hear it very differently. That's my hope too.
Gayle, at the end of this conversation, when you walked out of that room, what did you walk away with? What has stuck with you?
I walked away with great sadness, and I walked away with great anger. Because when you look, and they all brought up New Zealand after they had the mass shooting in New Zealand, how the politicians there changed the laws in 10 days because they said, we are not a society of people who want to live this way. And I look at this, you know, we're all for people own the Second Amendment rights and you owning your guns and responsible gun owners. But they were saying even the people in the NRA want to have background checks. And they were saying nobody who's not a military officer or a police officer should have the weapons of war. That's why this is so scary and so frustrating.
Well,
but I love talking. I love talking to them, and I love that you could have put a face on every single one of these people.
We thank our panel for opening up to Gayle, and we thank you for watching on CBSN. I'm Chris Van Cleve. More news continues after the break. CBSN, CBS News, always on.